Every Friday, the elderly woman silently placed a box of cookies on the post office steps. Nobody asked why. Nobody thanked her. The clerk barely nodded acknowledgement anymore. For 8 years she continued without fail, through rain, snow, and personal pain. One autumn morning the ground trembled. A Black Hawk helicopter descended into her backyard. A soldier stepped out, holding a faded silver card, tears streaming down his weathered face. Who could make an elite military unit land just to repay a debt of gratitude? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Mabel Jennings's hands weren't as steady as they once were, but at 71 she could still roll cookie dough with the precision that had made her famous in Oak Ridge, Iowa. Her small kitchen filled with the aroma of vanilla and cinnamon, as the morning sun filtered through faded gingham curtains she'd sewn decades ago. Widowed for 15 years after cancer claimed her husband James, Mabel lived alone in the modest two-bedroom house where they had raised their only son Ryan. The walls still held his photographs, from gap-toothed elementary school portraits to his proud stance in marine dress blues. Ryan had followed his father's military path, serving with distinction until 2007 when an IED in Afghanistan took his life at 23. After 40 years teaching second grade at Oak Ridge Elementary, Mabel had retired to a quiet life. Her pension covered her modest needs, allowing her to donate regularly to the local church and volunteer at Sunny Pines Retirement Home every Wednesday. But it was her baking that truly defined her in the community. Her pies had won the county fair blue ribbon 11 years running, and her Christmas cookies were legendary. On a chilly evening in 2015, Mabel sat alone watching the nightly news. A report showed soldiers deployed in Syria, young men and women in dusty uniforms, squinting into the desert sun. One soldier, barely older than Ryan had been, smiled shyly at the camera and mentioned missing his mom's chocolate chip cookies. Mabel found herself weeping, her tea growing cold beside her. The young man's expression, that mixture of bravery and homesickness, had mirrored Ryan's in his last video call home. The next morning she woke with purpose. By noon she had baked 24 chocolate chip cookies and a dozen snickerdoodles, carefully packaging them in a tin lined with wax paper. She penned a simple note, for someone far from home, stay safe. Mabel C. At the post office, she asked for the address of the nearest military base. The clerk seemed surprised but provided the information for Fort Dixon, 40 miles away. Mabel paid for shipping without hesitation. Her teacher's pension stretched a little thinner that month. No acknowledgement came, no thank you note. But the following Friday, Mabel returned with another tin of cookies and another handwritten note. Week after week she continued her ritual. One tin became two, then three, as she imagined different soldiers receiving them. She never mentioned her son directly, but on each box she wrote, for those serving silently. From a mother who once waited for her son. Not everyone understood her dedication. Martha Linden, her neighbor of 20 years, shook her head one afternoon as Mabel loaded cookies into her old Buick. You really think they eat all those cookies you send? Martha asked, arms crossed over her garden fence. You're just wasting flour and sugar, Mabel. At the post office, Debbie Henderson, who had once been Mabel's student, now processed her packages with a pitying smile. Nobody's thanked you yet, have they, Mrs. Jennings? People these days don't appreciate things like they used to. Mabel simply smiled. That's not why I do it, Debbie. As months stretched into years, Mabel's Friday routine became as regular as church bells. She never missed a week, not during the blizzard of 2017 when she had to dig her car out of 3 feet of snow, not during her bout with pneumonia in 2019 when she baked sitting on a kitchen stool, and not even in 2020 when the world shut down and the post office limited its hours. 8 years, 416 Fridays, 416 unreturned gestures of love sent to strangers who wore the same uniform her son had died in. The kind ones often pay the highest price, Mabel told her cat Sergeant, as she tied another ribbon around a cookie tin. But sometimes, it's the only road they know how to travel. Stay with us to discover what happens next to Mabel. In her 8th year of sending cookies, Mabel's arthritis flared badly one Thursday night. Her fingers, swollen and painful, made writing her usual note difficult. The pen slipped, leaving an ink smudge across the card. Too tired to start over, she added a postscript. My son loved these before he fell in Afghanistan. That particular box traveled farther than most. Through a series of military mail transfers, it reached Forward Operating Base Horizon in northern Iraq, where Captain Andrew Mercer was serving his 3rd deployment. The captain had been having one of the worst days of his military career. A mission had gone sideways, not catastrophically but enough to leave him questioning his leadership. When the mail arrived, he almost ignored the battered cookie tin mixed in with official correspondence. Something, perhaps the handwriting that reminded him of his grandmother's, made him open it first. The cookies inside were slightly crumbled from their long journey, but still edible. It was the smudged note that stopped him cold. My son loved these before he fell in Afghanistan. Mercer set the tin down, his hands suddenly unsteady. 8 years earlier, as a freshly commissioned lieutenant, he had served in Afghanistan with the 2nd Battalion 8th Marines, the same unit referenced in the return address label on the box. With trembling fingers, he searched through his phone until he found an old unit photo. There, third from the left in the back row, stood Lance Corporal Ryan Jennings. The memory crashed over him. The patrol, the explosion, the frantic medevac that came too late. Ryan had saved 2 other Marines that day by spotting the IED first and shouting a warning. His last words, delirious with pain as they waited for the helicopter, had been about his mother's cookies and how he'd promised to bring some for the whole unit when he got home. Captain Mercer sat alone in his quarters that night, the tin open beside him, wondering how many of Mabel Jennings's cookies he had unknowingly eaten over the years, wondering if she knew that her son had died a hero, wondering if anyone had told her that his sacrifice had saved other mothers from receiving the same devastating news she had. Back in Oak Ridge, Mabel's quiet dedication was becoming the subject of unwelcome attention. A local blog post, titled "Iowa Woman Self-Appoints as Soldier's Mom," suggested she was seeking publicity. The writer, who hadn't bothered to interview Mabel, characterized her efforts as emotional performative patriotism, designed to garner media attention. The post circulated among certain groups in town. Mabel first noticed the change when Hammer's Hardware, where she'd bought baking supplies for decades, suddenly claimed to be out of the vanilla extract she requested. "Maybe try ordering online," the owner's son suggested with a shrug. "We don't want to get involved in anything political." Political? Mabel had repeated, genuinely confused. "It's just vanilla, Peter." Even at church, where Mabel had taught Sunday school for 30 years, people began keeping a polite distance. No one mentioned her cookie ministry anymore during prayer requests. The silence was subtle, but unmistakable. Mabel's grandniece, Clara, visiting from college, noticed the shift immediately. "Aren't people supporting your cookie project anymore, Aunt Mabel?" she asked over Sunday dinner. Mabel carefully cut her roast beef before answering. "People have their own concerns these days. Doesn't it make you angry?" After all these years, Mabel's smile held more sadness than bitterness. "I'm not angry, dear. As long as someone remembers Ryan, that's enough for me." The unmarked envelope arrived in Mabel's mailbox. Inside was a brief handwritten letter. "Mrs. Jennings, I served alongside your son in Afghanistan. Your cookie saved my life last week when I was contemplating the darkest choice a soldier can make. Knowing someone still cares enough to bake for strangers gave me the courage to seek help. Please don't stop what you're doing." Tucked inside the letter was something Mabel recognized immediately, a worn Marine Corps emblem that had once belonged to Ryan's uniform. She had thought it lost with his personal effects. Mabel pressed the emblem to her heart and wept, telling no one about the letter. She simply added the emblem to Ryan's memory box and continued baking. As winter approached, the local blog post resurfaced, this time accompanied by a video someone had surreptitiously recorded at the post office. In it, Mabel could be seen carefully arranging her packages, while a male voice off camera called out, "Hey old lady, when are you going to realize nobody cares about your cookies anymore?" Mabel's face in the video remained composed, though her hands trembled visibly as she completed her task. The video went viral locally, drawing cruel comments and mockery from people who knew nothing of Ryan, nothing of Mabel's quiet grief, nothing of the letter tucked in her Bible that proved at least one soldier had been saved by her consistency. Every Friday, despite it all, Mabel Jennings continued her ritual, mixing, baking, packaging, delivering. The calendar pages turned, the seasons changed, but her resolve remained unshaken. Her doctor had cautioned her about overexertion. "Miss Jennings, at your age, with your arthritis, this weekly baking marathon is taking a toll on your health." Mabel had simply smiled. "Some pains are worth bearing, doctor." Each batch of cookies carried something invisible. Memories of Ryan's childhood, when they'd baked together on rainy afternoons. His teenage years, when he'd sneak cookie dough from the bowl. His last leave before deployment, when he'd helped her perfect a new recipe for snickerdoodles. Each carefully tied ribbon carried a mother's unending love that refused to acknowledge death as its conclusion. "As long as there are soldiers away from home," she told Sergeant the cat as she tied another ribbon, "there should be someone who remembers they matter. If you still believe in the power of small acts of kindness, type HOPE in the comment. Tell us about a time when a small gesture made a huge difference in your life, or someone else's." On a particularly cold Friday in November, Mabel woke with her joints screaming in protest. The arthritis that had been her companion for years had worsened, and the weather forecast predicted snow by afternoon. Still, she eased herself out of bed at her usual 5 a.m., determined to maintain her schedule. By mid-morning she had finished baking, but found herself struggling to carry the cookie tins to her car. The first box slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the kitchen floor. Cookies scattered across the linoleum like casualties. Mabel sank into a kitchen chair, momentarily defeated. For the first time in 8 years, she considered skipping a week. Clara, staying with her great-aunt during college break, found Mabel sitting amid the fallen cookies, silently weeping. "Aunt Mabel, maybe it's time to stop," she suggested gently, kneeling beside her. "You've done enough. No one would blame you." Mabel wiped her eyes with a flour-dusted hand. "Once a week," she said, her voice stronger than her body appeared. "It gives me a reason to get up early." Those simple words broke Clara's heart. She helped Mabel clean up the mess, and insisted on driving her to the post office. Throughout town, attitudes toward Mabel had hardened. Some viewed her as a stubborn old woman clinging to an unhealthy obsession. Others saw her as seeking attention. Few understood the depth of her commitment or the private grief that fueled it. The following Thursday, Mabel prepared her cookies as usual, though she needed Clara's help to package them. That night, she slept poorly, her dreams filled with Ryan's laughter and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Friday dawn, clear and cold. Mabel was sipping her morning tea when the first vibrations shook her china cabinet. The sound grew from a distant thrum to an unmistakable rhythmic beating that rattled her windows. "Aunt Mabel," Clara called from upstairs. "Something's happening outside." Mabel made her way to the back porch, just as an enormous Black Hawk helicopter descended into her modest backyard, powerful rotors bending her old apple tree and sending fallen leaves swirling into miniature tornadoes. Neighbors emerged from surrounding homes, some still in bathrobes, all wearing expressions of disbelief. Mrs. Linden stood with her mouth agape at the garden fence. Down the street, someone was already live streaming the unprecedented event. As the rotors slowed, 6 uniformed soldiers disembarked in perfect formation. They wore formal dress uniforms, with medals glinting in the morning sun. The lead officer, a captain with the name Mercer on his uniform, carried a wooden plaque. Mabel stood frozen on her back steps as Captain Mercer approached and rendered a crisp salute. "Mrs. Mabel Jennings?" he asked, though he clearly knew who she was. Mabel nodded, one hand clutching her cardigan closed against the helicopter-generated wind. "I'm Captain Andrew Mercer. I was the last surviving member of your son's squad in Afghanistan." The words hit Mabel like physical blows. After 15 years of silence about Ryan's service, 15 years of official letters, informal condolences, but no personal connections to his final days, here stood someone who had known her son in those last moments. Captain Mercer continued, his voice carrying to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Mrs. Jennings, 8 years ago, you began sending cookies to deployed troops. What you couldn't have known is that your cookies found their way to members of your son's former unit multiple times." He paused, visibly emotional. "Last year I received a package with a smudged note mentioning your son. That's when I realized who you were and what you've been doing all these years." Mabel's legs weakened. Clara rushed to support her as Captain Mercer revealed the full truth. "Before your son died, he spoke of you. He told us how you baked cookies for his entire Little League team after every game, win or lose. He promised that when he came home, he'd bring your cookies for everyone." The captain's voice broke slightly. "Mrs. Jennings, without even knowing it, you fulfilled your son's final promise." A collective gasp rose from the neighbors gathering at Mabel's yard boundaries. Even Martha Linden pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "The last package we received arrived exactly on the anniversary of an operation in Kandahar, where 3 of our men were saved because of intelligence your son had provided. We were holding a memorial service when your cookies arrived. It felt like Ryan was there with us." Captain Mercer gestured and the other soldiers stepped forward, each holding something: a folded flag, a shadow box containing medals, photographs of smiling soldiers holding cookie tins. "Mrs. Jennings, over 8 years, your cookies reached military personnel in 7 countries. They were shared among units who never knew your name, but felt your care. They arrived during the darkest moments, holidays away from family, after failed missions, during sandstorms and firefights." He presented the wooden plaque, elegantly engraved, "Mabel Jennings, Mother of Honor, for unwavering support of American troops." This isn't an official military designation. It's something great. It's a title given to you by over 3,000 service members who have been touched by your kindness. From inside the helicopter, another soldier emerged, carrying a large leather-bound book. As he approached, Captain Mercer explained, "This contains messages from everyone we could find who received your cookies. Some wrote pages, some just signed their names. All wanted you to know that someone noticed, someone remembered." The book contained hundreds of entries, photographs of soldiers eating Mabel's cookies in dusty outposts, handwritten notes of gratitude, stories of how a simple cookie had brought a moment of home to hellish circumstances. A reporter who had arrived with the growing crowd called out, "Miss Jennings, how does it feel to be recognized like this?" Mabel,
still supported by Clara, considered the question carefully before answering. I never wanted recognition, she said, her voice soft but clear. I only did what any mother would do. I kept a promise my son couldn't keep himself. Captain Mercer nodded. That's why we're here, ma'am. Not just to thank you, but to let you know that your son's spirit has been with us all these years. Through your hands, his promise was fulfilled. The crowd had grown silent, many wiping tears. Among them stood the hardware store owner, who had denied her vanilla extract, the church members who had distanced themselves, and somewhere in the back, the blogger whose cruel words had circulated through town. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across Mabel's yard, something shifted in Oak Ridge, a quiet recognition of how thoroughly they had misjudged the elderly woman, who had never sought attention, never demanded acknowledgement, never stopped believing that small acts of kindness matter, even when they appear to vanish into the void. If you believe that justice delayed is still justice, type JUSTIC. Mabel declined them all with the same gentle firmness she had shown throughout her life. I didn't do it for the cameras, she told Clara. I won't start now. Without fanfare, Mabel continued her Friday ritual, but now with unexpected support. Ingredients appeared on her porch. Premium vanilla from the hardware store that had once turned her away, butter and eggs from Martha Linden's chickens, specialty chocolate from as far away as Belgium sent by a soldier's grateful parents. The town's industrial kitchen at the high school was offered for larger baking sessions. Mabel accepted these gestures with grace, but insisted on maintaining the personal touch. Each cookie needs to be made with care, she explained. That's what makes them more than just food. Behind the local church where Mabel had worshipped for decades, a small memorial garden was established. At its center stood a bronze plaque, the Jennings Cookie Ministry, because love travels farther than we know. In Mabel's kitchen, time-worn symbols took on deeper meaning. The old tin box labeled Ryan Forever 23, that had once held photographs, now contained dozens of military patches, coins and small tokens sent by grateful service members. Beside her flower canister stood a folded American flag, not Ryan's, which remained in her living room, but one that had flown over a base in Iraq, where her cookies had once brought comfort. Oak Ridge Elementary School, where Mabel had taught for 4 decades, established an annual Jennings Kindness Day, teaching children that small, consistent acts of compassion could change lives in ways they might never witness. 17-year-old Lily Peterson, who had once rolled her eyes at the cookie lady, found her perspective transformed after witnessing the helicopter landing. I used to think Mrs. Jennings was weird, she admitted to her friends, as they baked together for the local nursing home. Now I bring cookies to Sunny Pines every Friday. It's like she taught us something without saying a word. Lily wasn't alone. Throughout Oak Ridge, people began noticing opportunities for quiet service, not for recognition, but simply because it needed doing. Mabel had demonstrated that consistency trumps grandeur, that faithfulness matters more than fanfare. On her kitchen wall, Mabel hung 3 simple frame quotes that captured her life philosophy. Kindness needs no acknowledgement, but is always remembered. Not everyone who does right is recognized, but they always leave a mark on someone else's life. She didn't need them to remember her name. She just wanted someone to eat a cookie and remember they weren't forgotten. Perhaps the most meaningful change came during the town's Veterans Day ceremony, where once Mabel had stood alone at Ryan's memorial. Now dozens joined her, many bringing homemade cookies to share in his memory. Captain Mercer returned, this time with several members of Ryan's unit, to stand beside the mother whose kindness had touched them from afar. As winter descended on Oak Ridge, Mabel found her arthritis easing somewhat, whether from reduced stress or the warmth of newfound community support, she couldn't say. She continued baking, continued sending packages, continued living the quiet example that had, against all odds, echoed around the world. Later that evening, as Mabel stirred a fresh batch of dough with Clara humming in the background, she paused to look around the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon filled the air, but so did something deeper: peace, the kind that comes from knowing that even if the world had taken so much, it hadn't taken her ability to give. Do you ever wish the recognition had come soon? Clara asked her one snowy evening as they packaged cookies together. Mabel considered this, her hands moving steadily despite their age. The timing doesn't matter, she finally said. The cookies were never about me, they were about remembering all the Ryans still serving, remembering that no one should feel forgotten. As I've written Mabel Jennings's story, I keep asking myself, if the world had one more person like her, would war hurt less? Between cold judgments, she chose silence. Between hopeless waiting, she chose action. How many of us have done the right thing without ever being thanked? I've thought about Mabel's story for days now, about how modern society often rewards the loudest voices, the most dramatic gestures, the viral moments, while overlooking the quiet consistency that truly changes lives. Mabel never sought recognition. She sought connection to her son's memory, to the young men and women who lived the life he had lost, to a purpose greater than her grief. There's something profound in her 8 years of silence, something we rarely see celebrated in a world of instant gratification. Mabel Jennings reminds us that genuine kindness isn't a performance. It isn't hashtagged or photographed. It simply continues day after day, regardless of recognition. I wonder how many Mabel live among us, people whose quiet contributions go unnoticed, until some dramatic revelation forces us to see what was always there. The retired teacher who tutors struggling students for free, the neighbor who shovels everyone's sidewalk before dawn, the anonymous donor who keeps the community shelter running, the hospice volunteer who sits with the dying when no family remains. I read every comment you share, and I know thousands of you have been someone's Mabel Jennings. You've done the right thing when it wasn't convenient. You've given when no one was looking. You've persisted when everyone else gave up. We don't need certificates of appreciation. We don't need viral recognition. We need to believe that doing right creates ripples we may never see. Just as Mabel's cookies traveled across continents, touching lives she would never know about until that Black Hawk landed, there are people who do kind things in silence. There are people whose names are never mentioned in news reports or social media feeds. There are people who serve without expectation of return. And there are cookies baked, not for fame or followers, but for comfort and connection. Perhaps we all need to ask ourselves, what cookies are we baking? What consistent kindness can we offer? What promise can we fulfill for someone who can no longer fulfill it themselves? Mabel's story isn't just about a soldier's gratitude. It's about the power of unwavering commitment to a simple act of kindness and how such commitment can, against all odds, eventually be recognized and honored. If you still believe in heroes who never appear on TV, help us tell their stories. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where acts of kindness are never forgotten. Type remember if you've ever known someone like Mabel, or if you've ever been that person yourself, continuing a kind act when no one seemed to notice or care. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.